And so the church is at peace, and the presence of God is still with us. And we must be reminded of this, and we're reminded of the great things that happen in life. So this morning, God said to me, it's time for you to tell the story. I'm going to go to the main parts of the story, because if I tell you the whole thing, you'll be here for 45 minutes or longer. I'll tell those later. It happened in December of 1982. Sounds like the beginning of a storybook, right? Like it happened on a dark and stormy night. But in December of 1982, my first assignment, I was ordained in May of 1982. I was stationed at St. Martin of Tours in northeast Philadelphia. At the time was the largest parish in the diocese. There were 2,000 students in our grade school. There were 6 classrooms of every grade. There was no kindergarten or preschool. It was just 1st through 8th grade. 2,000 students, 6 classrooms of every grade. And I became friendly with some of the younger teachers. And after Friday afternoons, we used to go to like TGI Fridays or something to get a drink and have appetizers. We're all about the same age. And the 2nd grade teacher, one of the 2nd grade teachers, Kate, she was very upset because one of her students, she blamed herself for putting this little boy, Chucky McGivern, next to someone whom she didn't know at the time had either chickenpox or measles, I don't remember. But I didn't know, of course. I could have been there for 10 years and not know all those kids. There were just so many kids. So I didn't know who this person was, this little boy, Chucky McGivern. But Kate was beating herself up and blaming herself because she sat him next to a little boy who had the measles or chickenpox. He got them. And there's something you should not do to a young child when they have a fever. You should never give them aspirin because they can develop what's known as Rye syndrome, a very deadly disease, the swelling of the brain. In almost every case, it's fatal. At the time it was anyway. And if you did survive by some slim chance, you were severely brain damaged. Well, she was upset because Chucky had gotten Rye syndrome. She was blaming herself. He was sent to the local hospital, and then he went into a coma and was sent down to Children's Hospital where he was hooked up to everything. He was in a coma for days. All his organs were stopping functioning. Mrs. McGivern heard the nurses talking. They didn't know she was there. The nurses said, he's not going to make it. His lungs are garbage. And when I went to see him, he was hooked up to every machine. Incredible. He looked white, stone white, as the white this marble. He looked dead already. There was wires in his brain trying to keep the swelling down. So what happened, I went to talk to Kate at lunchtime the one day when Chucky was, and I found out when he was down there. And we were talking with 2,000 kids running around in the schoolyard. Can you imagine the noise level? And we're talking. And I said, it's not your fault, we're talking. And my concern was that this was December. He was going to receive his first penance and then communion in the spring. He was not going to have a chance to receive the Eucharist because he was going to die. So I said to Kate, I want to bring him communion. And she said, you can't, he's in a coma. This was the first time that I realized that God was speaking to me. He speaks to all of us, even though we don't realize it many times. But 2 times, this was the first time I heard him talk as if you're talking to me. Actually hear his voice. It is powerful. In fact, it takes over your whole body. For about 10 seconds when he was speaking to me, I had no free will. What he said, I did. It was like, and I'll talk about how important free will is and why God gives it to us at another time. Because I know I've experienced twice him taking away my free will for about 8 seconds. And it's something you do not want. But God said to me, and I was going to say, well, when she said you can't bring a communion, I in my mind, I was ready to say, and half of the sentence came out, well, then I guess I can't do anything. But in mid-sentence, I heard the voice of God, very powerful, say to me, go and anoint him. So what came out of my mouth was, I guess I can't, I'm going to go anoint him. And I immediately left. Now, I did not know what was happening before I got there, after I got there, and even 6 weeks later. I finally went to Children's Hospital, finally found the room. It's very confusing, all the hallways. I found the room. Chucky was in a huge room all by himself, his bed, and I went in. He was hooked up to everything. He looked stone cold white, not moving, coma for days. And I was thinking, well, these people have great devotion, because there was a relic. I didn't know it was John Newman at the time, and some medals. And on the opposite of his bed, there was a picture of John Newman, put on the wall about this high, was the picture that the Inquirer had put out in the newspaper when John Newman was canonized a saint. And it was up there kind of crooked with masking tape. Nobody knows where that picture came from. None of the nurses, no one in the family. I remember going in thinking they have great faith. And they had faith, but it was not a great faith. I didn't find out till later. But they were praying and asking, intercession for John Newman to help Chucky. John Newman loved children. He's the founder of the Catholic school system. He loved children. And so I remember going in there and thinking, wow, they have great faith. And looking at this child, he looked already dead. And so I anointed him. And when I placed my hand on him, when we do the anointing, the going down, the Holy Spirit, this is the first time and only time I ever felt, from my elbow to my hand, it felt like a tingling, almost like electricity when I was placing it on his head. I anointed him, prayed there for a while. Told the nurse to record and put in his medical records that he was anointed, because they do that. Then I asked to some see the parents, and they said, you go down to the hospitality room, which took me a while to find too. I'm not real good with directions. So I remember walking in, and Mrs. McGivern was taking a shower, I was told, in the next room. And Mr. McGivern was sitting there, the TV was on. The look on his face, at the time I thought, well, it's because his son is dying. He looked totally confused and lost. I introduced myself, who I was, and what I anointed Chucky. And at the time I thought it was just because he's losing his son. Later found out was that, plus the strange, incredible things that were happening. And then you show up, out of the blue. I didn't know them. They didn't ask for a priest. I just showed up. See, before I came, the father was in the room with the doctor standing at the bed. Mrs. McGivern was over at the window, a little bit away. And the doctor was saying to Mr. McGivern, now there is a little boy that keeps coming into the room here. And he said, and he's by himself. You shouldn't let your children walk around unescorted. So I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. We don't have in our family a little young boy like that. And as they were talking, this little boy walks into the room. About 10 years old, with a plaid jacket on, black long hair, cut very haphazardly with big glasses. And he came up at the bed and standing there at the bed, at the base of the bed. And the doctor said to him, what do you want? And he said, I came to see Chucky. And he got afraid and ran out of the room. The doctor said, this is the kid that's been showing up. Father said, I have never seen him in my life. By the time they got outside to the hall, there was no one there. Then I showed up, not knowing what's going on. I anointed him, went to see the parents. And as I left, after I left the hospitality room, Mr. McGivern is sitting there in the chair, just totally confused. He told me, Mrs. McGivern wrote all this stuff down in like a 15-page letter, step by step. There's a lot more that I'm not going to tell you because it's too long. And as he sat there totally confused, like, what is going on? He looks at the door, and that same little boy is staring at him, making eye contact, smiling. By the time he got up to the door, there was no one in the hallway. And after that happened, they got a call from the nurse, and she was all excited. She said, get down here fast. Father was here and anointed Chucky. I went in to check his vital signs, and I noticed his fingers were starting to move. By the time they got down to the hospital room, he was touching every wire and everything on his body. Within 1 hour, he was sitting up, unhooked from everything, completely fine, as if he never was sick, and eating. And the doctor said to them, who do you pray to? Mrs. McGivern said, why? He said, I've never seen anything like this. And so they were asking John Newman for a miracle. Also, when Chucky was in his coma, he told the story that in his coma there was a lot of little children in the room, and they looked Asian, their eyes were a little slanted. Sometimes cherubs look like that. But there was one special boy, he said, as he was laying in the box with chains across, this little boy, about 10 years old, kept coming to him, bringing him toys and telling him, Chucky, you're going to be okay. And he described the same boy, 10 years old, plaid jacket, black scraggly hair, big rimmed glasses, in his coma. So they went to the shrine after Christmas to give thanks, and they told their story to the head priest down at the shrine, John Newman's shrine. And Father Fehrenbach showed them all around. And as they were going through the little museum that they had at the time, Father Fehrenbach was showing them everything. And they came to a picture of John Newman as a child. It was the kid in the room. Both Mr. McGivern and Chucky were totally shocked. Now, I didn't know any of this went on. About 6 weeks later, I got a call from Father Fehrenbach at St. Martin of Tours. He said, "Bob, did you anoint Chucky McGivern?" I said, "Yes." "When did he die?" He said, "Just first to tell me if you anointed him." So I went to the book. When we anoint someone, we have to put the person's name, where, and when they were anointed. So I said, "Yes, I anointed him at Children's Hospital. This was the day." And then he told me the story. I was amazed. And I never talked about it. Close friends knew, my family, and McGivern's never talked about it either, because it seemed so incredible. Who's going to believe you, this incredible thing, this miracle that happened? It wasn't me, it was God. God just used me. And there are so many other ways I could tell you sometime ago how the miracle came out 10 years later. Eventually got on Unsolved Mysteries. What is that all about, these miracles? Here, all present to us. This blessed Carlos, 15-year-old boy, incorruptible, who loved the Eucharist incredibly. He will become a saint, hopefully shortly, when we get the next miracle through his intercession. We are disciples of the Lord. And what does that mean? That our hearts and the church, who you are, should be at peace and secure at the knowledge of all these things around us that tell us there is a God and he is present to us and he loves us. He interacts. He is present in our life. We should not have any doubts. God is there. The church should be at peace in our hearts because of all this that happens in our life and the presence, the miracles, God showing himself, revealing himself to us, talking to us. I can't tell you how many phone calls I got after that, after it went national, international. How do you get a miracle? It's not so much how you get a miracle. It's how do we become disciples? How do we continue to be a part of the Lord, united with him as the gospel tells us? We do things and we can find peace, and the church can be at peace, and we can have in our hearts the knowledge of God by being disciples. It's not about getting miracles. It's about being united with Christ, a part of him. So it's he and God alone who does great things. But the greatest things that he does for us is we are disciples who know him and love him. And you know, even though some tremendous things like that have happened in my life, I still sin. I still have doubts. I'm not the most perfect person in the world. I've committed sins. But being a disciple of the Lord, the great miracle, I think, is that he continues to love us, continues to forgive us, and continues to be present to us. That's what all this is about. Being disciples and knowing that God is with us. And through it all, he continues to love us, even though we are so imperfect and incomplete.